What's up, guys? It's Kelsey, and I'm here with the CAD. What's up, everyone? Today on CAD Calls with Kelsey, we are talking with artist, sculptor, maker, and collector of things, Alicia Piller. Alicia makes really beautiful anthropomorphic works out of an incredibly diverse array of materials to explore themes like colonial histories, the climate crisis, gun violence, police brutality, and so much more. We are going to do today's video in the chair, and I will see everyone on the other side. So I just want to start by asking you about the materials that you use. I know that's a really integral part of your work, and I'm wondering how much of this is found objects and how much are things that you've sort of crafted and created yourself.
So yeah, the materials is kind of like a vast, it's like a spectrum of things happening. Basically, I'm creating objects with literal, like, anything I'm finding in nature, and people literally, like, somebody just shipped me a box of little burl pieces that they thought were cool that I love.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of a mixture of found and sourced. So I think the sourcing of materials is a newer thing. It usually in the past was me working with what was available and having to just build my practice off of, it's kind of like, I don't have that much money, I got to work with what I have, but now that time has gone on and I've gone to graduate school and things like that, I'm allowing myself more like freedom to be like, okay, it's okay for me to buy this thing that I need for this project. So there's definitely a mixture of man-made, mixture of natural, which is me foraging, me hiking and doing a lot of urban hiking and doing a lot of literal collecting actual objects, but also photographing things that maybe I can't collect. And then those photographs end up becoming objects themselves within a sculptural work. So it's kind of a lot of layers of collection and, buying a little bit, but like I said, I try not to. And then also for me, it's about repurposing waste because there's just so much. And I personally get upset when I'm like, people are throwing out a bunch of stuff that's like, I could make something with. I'm like, no, it's just going to go to a landfill. Give it to me. I can breathe some new life into it and talk about something bigger.
I'm really interested in that aspect of your work specifically, because when you're using sort of the detritus of industry and of, capitalism, and you're creating bodies, essentially, you're gifting agency to these things they're sort of violent objects in a way.
I mean, I think that for me, it's about recognizing our history, our place in the world without ignoring, without, it's not like, oh, we live in this great world where it's just all plants and nature. No, we live in a world with plastic. We live in a world with garbage. We live in a world with hate and light and dark. And it's about the works. I try to represent a sort of cohesion of history, like the light and the dark coming together, the man-made and the natural coming together, because that's the world we live in. So it's almost like the works that I'm making are like these organisms for me. Like each work is its own little organism growing, and it's like us. We're a product of our environment, of our world, and so are these works. They're just more visceral and more like they're pulling out an energy is what I'm trying to do.
You have sent me a lot of process photos, which I want to get into. And I want to start with this one. So this is really watching the process of how you have taken this image and revolutionized where it came from is just fascinating. Can you tell me a little bit about it while I sort of click through them?
Yeah, totally. So basically, this was a photo shoot that I did last year when I was in graduate school at Cal Arts. And these were pieces that I had made throughout the year, but I was really focusing on this critique and looking at history, but looking at how do we get to where we are now? And to do that, examining colonialism, examining this American history that got us to this place. So the works in this piece are sort of like the remnants of other pieces. And me, because I think of each thing as an organism, sort of cradling these pieces that weren't even that important in the works that they were a part of, but making them important, making them be coveted in a way and loved, but almost with a sadness. And to me, that's the weight of carrying this American history. So that was like the basis of me doing this photographic series. And again, it's me like each work kind of implodes on itself. And so in the photos, I'm photographing actual sculptural forms that I've created. And then the process leads to taking those photographs and again, and continuing, pushing the process, and those become objects themselves. This is like me printing out those images over and over, and then literally cutting them out all the same, whatever that, I create like a system of, if I'm going to cut it this way, you have to cut all of them that way. And then each individual photograph or object or seed or whatever the material I'm using at the time gets wrapped in a vinyl, which is just wrapping each photograph, each edge. And you can see that with this work. So this is a part of a sculpture that I included those photographs in. There's other photographs also, but each one is wrapped in vinyl. And for me, that's where the organism starts. That is the membrane. That is the skin. That is the outside of the cell. And each form gets built up. So there's this, I'm really thinking about biology. I'm really thinking about how nature is made. Like, how is a flower? When I really look at plants and nature, I'm really examining the process of growth. And so those photographs ended up becoming this sculptural form. And it's about really from a micro macro level, like taking and building and building and building and building the way life is built, the way we are built.
And there's something, I have to say, there's something sort of in a way fetishistic about how generative these things are. I started to think a little bit about and maybe this isn't something that you would say about your work, but a little bit about like commodity fetishism, and almost like you're engaging in that in order to critique that, which I thought was really interesting. You would say that's accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the repetition of shape and imagery it's like a sort of critique on capitalism and commodification, but also simultaneously mimicking biology. And it's a weird connection that is sort of happening, and that has happened on its own for me. I used to make jewelry and do a lot of fashion world stuff, more art related things with fashion. So I think there is it's always embedded in me, this sort of sense of commodity and this capitalist thing that we have as a society where we need these things. And maybe that's a part of me, collecting materials as well. I see the downside of capitalism in a lot of ways, but materially there's so much waste. And so, yeah, it ends up almost telling a similar tale. It's like, through the work.
I actually want to talk about that history, your history of fashion. And I read also about leather making and general craft making. And because those are more, I wouldn't say the fashion industry as a whole, but those are more sort of intimate forms of production versus, industry. I'm wondering if you're sort of turning on its head these issues of commodification by having such an intimate relationship with the object that you're making.
Yeah, I think that it really speaks to how capitalism creates a sort of obsession
Mm-hmm.
of commodity, and like the idea that we need to have these things and there's a million of them in a store. You know, there's something to me that's fascinating about that, but also obviously destructive. And you know, being a part of the Anthropocene, like we are all a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't. I as much as I would love to just be making things with, you know, plants or whatever, I feel like I have to represent this time, and this time is heavily material world that we're in.
Yeah.
And so I just choose to embrace it, but also embracing to critique.
Yeah. And speaking of this time, I specifically want to talk about the fact that you have sent me images that you've labeled as before Corona and after Corona. I think that's really interesting. I know that I did ask you about how the pandemic was affecting your work, but I want to know if you see a split. Like, do you see a difference in the work you were making before and after the pandemic started?
Definitely. I mean, you know, in general, my work is about speaking to the times and using news headlines. Again, using the actual like headline itself over and over. In this case, it was a newspaper, an art newspaper called Full Bleed, and it was from an issue from 2019, and I was just repurposing that newspaper, mainly
Mm-hmm.
because like you know, it was January when I started working on it, and I'm a workaholic. I needed to work,
Mm-hmm.
but I was really thinking about, oh, it's, you know, 2020, it's a new year, you know, let's ritually release, energetically release this past. And you know, just not knowing the crazy year we were going to have. And so like, this is another piece that I started before the pandemic. And I was really thinking about the images. It's hard to tell from, it's such a big and crazy detailed piece, but I'm using images from firefighters dealing with, you know, fire issues in California last year. There's images of dealing with racism, and it's just kind of like what was happening in the news last year.
Right, right.
And so I was really just again, it was really in my mind, like letting go of this past. And there's this image that I use a lot within my work, which you can see kind of in here. It's these sycamore seeds that I've laid out,
Mm-hmm.
and I was dissecting them, and I was using them throughout a lot of works, but dissecting them, laying them out, and counting them. And I was really, oh yeah, I forgot, I totally forgot. This is the actual seed, and I was drawn to it because it was just something I would encounter on my daily hikes. And this is one seed. This image is me dissecting one seed and then counting all the seeds out, and really thinking about the idea of going into a community, and what does it mean to thinking about colonialism. What does it mean to go into a place and reconfigure that place? What does it mean to take it apart and literally destroy it, essentially? And
Mm-hmm.
then and to sort of put all the pieces back together in a new way. And so this was me actually counting those parts. Um, so it's about nations, it's about peoples, it's about immigration, and that these tropes, and this is just one of many parts of my systems, but this system has been put into many works. So that work that I was doing at the beginning of the year, I was still really thinking about, you know, the detention centers, the immigration problem, all these, you know, terrible things that Trump is doing to
Mm-hmm.
immigrants. But then the year changed, and I think that what didn't change is that I'm still speaking to the times, but what did change was my materials. And that was because, and these images that you're showing are me reconfiguring those seeds. And again, I was each seed got wrapped in
Mm-hmm.
each and every one. And that's
Does that preserve the seed in any capacity, or is it just
no
part of the system?
part of the system. The seed itself it's it'll survive, but it's glued on a piece of paper,
Mm-hmm.
cut out. Each one is cut out. Each one is wrapped,
Mm-hmm.
and it's become I don't want to say an obsession, but like it's become just a part of my practice where it doesn't feel complete unless these objects are wrapped.
But
Because
it does feel not necessarily that you're doing this out of an obsessive, place, but there is an obsessive quality to these, and a proliferative quality to them that I think ends up being very prophetic. I mean, looking at these now from the space of existing in a world where there's a virus, and feeling the danger of this proliferative thing that exists out in the world that could affect your health, I'm wondering how that must have affected the work. Just even being in danger of this biological force.
yeah, I mean it to me. So the newer works, I'm working with what I have available. I'm not buying resin. I'm not buying my latex balloons. I'm not doing my usual things that I had been doing. For these newer works, I was really channeling, that feeling of being in quarantine. And so this work is called Disruptions. This is not a film. And in the imagery that you see, that's me actually taking a picture of these parts of a Polaroid camera, and I dissected the camera the way I dissected the seed. Same thing. I'm pulling all the parts apart and wrapping all the different parts, or taking the actual Polaroid film, which is the white in this work, and on one of the parts, as I'm dissecting, it says, "This is not a film." And I was like, whoa, it was just a weird sort of coincidence, because I was thinking about how there's all these pandemic movies and how this is actually happening, and how like this is like we are in a film, we are in this thing we never thought we'd be in, and so the works really became more poignant, more about specifically what's not on our past but the present. And I guess that maybe is a big part of it, is that instead of tying in my colonial critiques, it's literally speaking to the moment. And so also the materials themselves, I don't normally use Polaroid parts. It's like, I can't go out, I can't buy anything. What do I have at home to work with? And also I work doing industrial silk screening, industrial screen printing at a factory. So for me, that's the center part, is all the recycled, there's so much waste. There's so much waste at the factory. And I do my part by like literally like everything I do, I'm like collecting the waste. And so now, some of the people know to like, they save me all the tape when they're like taking all the tape off, or they, and all my ink gets saved when it's old. It's like, don't throw it away. So the materials have changed, and my eyes have opened to, well, what else can be my materials?
I've been reading this book recently called Vibrant Matter. You should totally take a look at it. It's really, really fascinating. It's by Jane Bennett. And she talks about, she has this fascination with hoarding. And she talks about the call of things, that things are, we don't have a way of describing objects that gives them agency over us. The only way we know how to talk is putting humans in the position of power and objects in the position of submission. And she tries to turn that around in all of her writings. And I'm wondering if that, in a way, is sort of a political stance as well. I mean, I sort of agency in these objects.
I think that instead of political, I think it's more spiritual. in a way, like, so to explain, like, I think a lot about ritual, and I think a lot about like fetish objects and the power that is imbued upon them by us, humans, and how that power is real, and how like making a thing with all of the history of each part, each thing, each plastic or metal, or where all those things came from and came together, they all have history and they all have their own energy, they all have their own power. And when you put them all together, they become this fetish object that literally is like a magical object in a way. Like, either it's magical because it's transporting you to some other place, it's magical because maybe like the object speaks to you or whatever. I almost look at the objects in that way. I'm like, oh, I can't let you go in the trash because like you're special. Like, you are gonna be something. Like, I can't let you go. And so I end up loving all the things in some way, and like that's why each thing has to be touched. Like, each, like the wrapping part of it is super key, because like I have to touch every part. Maybe a giant 10-foot thing, but every part in that 10-foot thing was touched and examined, you know.
And at the same time, you're like dissecting them. I mean, it's like you're creating an experiment or something out of these objects. You obviously care very deeply about them, and yet it, like, sometimes sort of violent things happen to them.
Exactly. Yeah. And even when I was dissecting those sycamore seeds, I was thinking, I'm like, I'm, in a weird way, I was like, I'm the colonizer here. I'm in that role where I'm destroying this beautiful object, this beautiful culture, this beautiful nation. I'm taking it and like, what does it mean to be in that power position? It was a weird experiment. They're all experiments to me that lead to systems. They're all experiments that lead to methods, and the next one, I literally am taking those systems forward and pushing them even forward.
Yeah. And this is a work that I've got on the screen now that I really want to talk about in relation to what you were just saying, because, you know, this versus being, it does feel like a system, an ecosystem, an organism in a way, but it also feels very much like a carcass, obviously, like a rib cage. So I'm wondering if you could speak sort of more to how you determine if a body is going to be, if it's going to be alive or dead, or if you even determine that, if it determines itself.
Well, for this piece in particular, I was thinking about a carcass, and this work is it has a longer title, obviously, Across the Wasteland, A Twisted Melody, Matter and Spirit, but its short form is, it's a humanity carcass. There's 200 years of headlines from the US that deal with racism and gun violence, and they're kind of like going back in time as you go through. And so I like, for me, for this piece, it's about the decay of all of this shit that we don't want in society anymore. It's a memorial. It's a putting it to rest. It's letting it rot, letting it die. And so what's interesting about this piece is actually it's changed a little bit now, because I'm not actively preserving it and archiving it the way I would other works. I'm allowing it to die. So as much as I'm giving it life, I experiment a lot with letting it decay and die on its own, because these some of the materials are, it's latex balloons and vinyl and human teeth, bullet casings, all of these things. And so now it's become a little yellow, a little more cracked, because it's been outside. And for me, it's, again, a part of the process of allowing the piece to live, and if I choose to die.
And so do you feel as though you're metaphorically attempting to let this history rot on the vine and move forward and sort of feel cleansed by interacting with this work?
Exactly. And that is why it becomes then a fetish object to me, because it's meant to spark that feeling of like putting this history to rest, even if it's not like really happening. I mean, it is. It's a slow process that we're going
Right.
through. But it's my contribution to ending this energy that we've been sitting in for hundreds of years. And then actually the piece that's hanging is not, it's a separate work.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I got to figure out how to display it, show the titles and things together. But basically that work was from images of people who were killed by the cops or through gun violence from 2015 and 2016. And that was like, it was really crazy to do, because I was literally printing out each person and then reading about them all. And in that work, it was all the Sandy Hook victims, all of the Orlando club victims, and it became this body, this literal. And I'm not always very literal. I mean, yes, it's a carcass shape, but that's not always my goal, to make a body, a carcass. Like, it's never my goal. It's just I let them happen organically. And so when I was putting these people together, they became a body. And so really that pushed this message of this carcass even further, because it was like, here's the product of this history, these people, these deaths.
And then by the process of you having these systems, in relation to this work, I'm sure, so you're printing out these images, you're touching each person, each face. Are you wrapping them in vinyl again here?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that, in a sense, is like you're creating, a ritual of mourning.
Oh, I love that.
These individuals.
Like, I gotta write that down. But yes, no, seriously. And I think that I'm doing this work because I need it. And I don't think of my work as like a therapy at all. But I do, when I look at it later, I'm like, whoa, I was going through this sadness about this, and I can see things after things have been made. So sometimes I get into a sort of void where I'm just making. And then I will sometimes use the thing I made right away. And then sometimes I just spend so much time on this thing and it gets put on the shelf for a year because I don't know what it was. But I come back to it later. So there's a lot of me sort of digging deep into my own psychology during, but also after things are made.
I've read that there is a cue ball that is decomposing in here.
I, maybe 10 years ago, found that cue ball in a thrift store in Brooklyn, when I used to live in Brooklyn, and it was from the 1950s. And that's another thing, I'm always collecting the history. I'm like, I need to know where this thing is from. And it was already decaying. And when you see it up close, it's just literally like, I don't know, it's an enamel over whatever it is. It's just dying. I don't know. It was fascinating. But to me, when I see these things, I'm like, it takes me to another place. So immediately, as the same way I'm looking at this sycamore seed as an earth form, this cue ball became that again. And it wasn't something I'm consciously aware of. And now I'm like, oh yeah, there are two circles that I'm collecting. but that's, my brain does that. And it just kind of does it on its own. But the cue ball began this work. So sometimes the works begin in different ways, but this is a perfect example of how just one object starts the work. And everything was made around it. Like, it was just like proliferating and growing, literally.
So you aren't determining what shape this is going to look like in any capacity. The form really does it itself.
Yes. I mean, yes, sometimes I like, for the carcass piece, I had that shape in mind, but a lot of times, no, I'm just letting it happen. I'm letting it grow into what it wants to be. And sometimes it wants to be a small thing, and sometimes it wants to just keep growing. And then I have problems and I need a warehouse space. But, but yeah, I do like to mix it up, and it happens. Sometimes actually what happens is I have an idea in mind that is something I've sketched out
Okay.
and I start to make that. But while I'm making the sketched out thing, there's a separate process happening always where maybe the waste from the piece I'm actually working on gets put into a totally different thing at the same time. I'm like, oh, let me, I'm making the thing I know, and then I'm using that trash, the waste from that, and creating something simultaneously. And sometimes those are better than the thing that I actually was planning.
That is so fascinating. It's almost like they're ancestors in a way, that they're like generating each other. I just love that. That's fascinating.
All connected.
Yeah.
My brain it's got a lot going on.
Okay, tell me about this work.
This one is actually in the Hammer collection, which I'm so proud of. And so in the show that I did in the fall, it was basically dealing with the past, the present, and the future. And so this is one of the future pieces. And I was really literally all the works from the past and present in the show, all of that trash put into all the future works. So like any of the paper that's in the center, all of the, like, I've actually on the top, there's like these pink flowers. Those are plastic bags that I've been hoarding since 2005.
Oh my goodness.
So, I'm like, I will use it 10 years later, but whatever, I'll use it eventually. And so this was just really special because it could not have been made unless those past works were made. And because that's what it is. And so, and also on the left side with the pink, that's all just dead palm tree parts. And that's just from my backyard, and so it's really, again, me using these garbage and sort of dead items and how do we take the past and reinvigorate it? And like thinking about that metaphorically, how do we not ignore the garbage, not ignore the history that we don't like, but let's integrate and learn and create something better.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I think really this piece embodies sort of the hopefulness that your work has. And like you said, it was just picked up by the Hammer, which is really exciting. That happened recently, correct?
Yes. I mean, like, it's still surreal. I'm like, when is the Hammer going to open again so I can
I'm going to go see my new work.
I know. Like, my parents are like, we're coming to the Hammer. Oh, wait.
You have that going on, which is super exciting. I just want to end with asking, what else you've got going on, where we can see you, where we can check out your work and everything.
Well, there's always my website, which is my first and last name.com, and my Instagram. But I'm doing, recently I put the carcass piece actually into this. It's called Retrospect. It's a music festival. It's a newer festival, and it's going to be all online. And it's coming out July 11th, and they're going to be like all these amazing musical performances. And what they did was I collaborated with two other artists, a guy who does lasers and a woman who works with flowers, and we created this installation that is sort of the background of this beautiful festival. So that was one of the kind of fun projects that I've done recently. And I'm going to have a piece that's going to be in the Glendale Community College collection. I'm very proud. Yes, it's, and actually what's so cool about that is that they chose a work that I just made dealing with the coronavirus. Like, it's like a new work. And I was like, oh, just so proud. I'm constantly working, and as soon as I move, I'm like, you have no idea. Like my brain is already like, oh my God, you have all these things. I have a lot of things I need to make.
And I know I am not alone when I say I'm so excited to see what Alicia comes up with in the rest of quarantine. It's Alicia's world and we're just living in it. I'm going to link her website and Instagram in the description down below. Thank you so much, Alicia, for sharing your time with us, and I will see you all in a couple weeks on CAD Calls with Kelsey.